The last surgery of Gianna Romano's shift had been a 10-year-old boy with a ruptured appendix. She had closed him up with steady hands and a calm she had trained herself never to lose, and by the time she peeled off her gloves and walked out of the operating theatre, it was 11:47 at night, and the hospital corridors had gone quiet the way only hospitals at midnight can. Not silent, never truly silent, but hushed, as if even the fluorescent lights were holding their breath. She changed out of her scrubs in the locker room, pulled on dark jeans, a cream-coloured blouse, and the camel wool coat her mother had sent from Florence 3 Christmases ago. She thought about stopping for a coffee at the vending machine near the nurses' station, decided against it, and walked out into the November cold of Manhattan with her bag over one shoulder and her keys already in her hand. Because she was a woman who lived alone, and she had learned that particular habit early. The drive home took 22 minutes. She lived in a brownstone in the West Village, on a narrow street lined with iron-railed stoops and maple trees that had gone bare weeks ago. The apartment was on the 3rd floor. 2 bedrooms, one she slept in, one she used as a study. Bookshelves, floor to ceiling. Medical journals stacked on the kitchen table. A half-finished bottle of Barolo on the counter that she kept telling herself she'd open on a special occasion. She had been telling herself that for 6 months. She unlocked the front door of the building, climbed the stairs, and was fishing for her apartment key when the door at the end of the hallway, the one that led to the fire escape, opened. 3 men stepped through it. They were dressed in black, not the careless black of people who happened to be wearing dark clothing, the deliberate black of men who did not wish to be seen. Balaclavas over their faces, gloves, and the one in front was already moving toward her with the practiced ease of someone who had done this before, many times, and had never once hesitated. Gianna did not scream. Later, she would tell herself this was shock. In truth, she thought she simply understood, in the first fraction of a second, that screaming would not help. She took 1 step back, hit the wall. The man reached her in 2 strides and had her arm before she could process that it was happening, and then there was something pressed against the side of her neck. Not a gun, she realized, a cloth, damp and sharp-smelling. "Don't fight," the man said. His voice was low, accented. Italian, something in her mind registered, even through the narrowing tunnel of her consciousness. "We don't want to hurt you." She heard herself say, very clearly, "Then let me go." He didn't. The last thing she saw before the dark took her was her key, still dangling from the lock she hadn't had the chance to open. She came back to herself in stages. First, warmth. She was not cold anymore, which meant she was no longer outside. Second, the smell. Leather. Expensive cologne. The faint, sterile bite of antiseptic beneath it. Third, sound. An engine. She was moving. A vehicle. Large, because there was no road vibration she could feel through whatever she was sitting on, which told her it was something armoured, something built heavy. An SUV, she thought, or a van. She kept her eyes closed, kept her breathing shallow, tried to inventory herself. Hands-free, she realized, not bound. That was unexpected. "She's awake," a voice said. Not the man from the hallway, someone else. "Leave her," said a second voice, and something about this one was different, quieter, carrying the kind of authority that didn't need volume. She opened her eyes. She was in the back of a large black SUV, seated between two men, both masked. Across from her, in the forward-facing seat, sat a third man, unmasked, which told her everything she needed to know about her situation, because men who showed their faces to their captives were either supremely confident they would never be identified, or they intended to ensure it didn't matter. He was perhaps 40, dark hair, cut close, a jaw that looked like it had been carved rather than grown. Dark eyes, not black, she would decide later, but the deep brown of aged mahogany, almost colourless in the dim interior of the car. A scar running along the left side of his jaw, thin and old and silver. He was wearing a suit that had probably cost more than her monthly rent, and he sat with his hands loose in his lap, like a man at a board meeting rather than one conducting a kidnapping. He was watching her with the kind of attention that felt less like observation and more like cataloguing. "Dr. Romano," he said, "I apologize for the method of transportation." "Do you?" she said, and was mildly proud of how level her voice came out. "It was necessary." "It wasn't," she said. "You could have knocked." Something moved in his face, not quite amusement, but adjacent to it. "We needed to ensure your cooperation." "Drugging me was your strategy for ensuring cooperation." She looked around the interior of the vehicle. "I'm a surgeon. I have 12-hour days and a mortgage. I cooperate with almost anything if you ask politely." He looked at her for a moment. "You're not frightened?" "I'm terrified," she said. "I'm simply also angry." "Where are you taking me?" "Somewhere you're needed," he said. "There is a man dying. You are the best trauma surgeon in New York City. Those two facts are the beginning and end of your involvement in this." "And after?" "After," he said, "we'll discuss terms." She held his gaze. It was not easy. He had the kind of eyes that made you want to look away, not because they were cruel, but because they were entirely, unblinkingly focused. And being the subject of that focus felt like standing in a beam of light too concentrated to be comfortable. "What is your name?" she asked. He said nothing. "Fine," she said. "Who's dying?" "Someone important." "They're all important to someone." She looked out the darkened window and saw nothing. They had covered the glass, she realized. Of course they had. "How critical is the patient?" A pause. Then, "He took 2 bullets to the chest approximately 2 hours ago. Our medic has stabilized him, but only barely. He needs surgery." Gianna felt her doctor's mind click into gear, despite everything else, the fear, the fury, the disbelief that this was her Tuesday night. "Blood type?" "A positive." "What supplies do you have on site?" "Whatever you tell us you need, we will have had delivered before you arrive." She thought about that. 2 hours since the injury, and he's still breathing? "He is difficult to kill," the man across from her said, and there was something in his voice when he said it. Not pride exactly, but something close to it. Something personal. "Is this man a relative of yours?" she asked. He looked at her steadily. "He is my employer," he said. But she didn't believe him, and she filed that away. They drove for what she estimated was 40 minutes. Gianna counted the turns. Old habit. She'd read it in a thriller once, at 15, and the practice had lodged itself in some useful corner of her brain. Left, right, right, long straight stretch, slight incline, then a turn onto what felt like gravel beneath the tires. The rhythm of the road changed, and then they stopped, and the door was opened from outside. Cold air, pine, the distant sound of what might have been a river. She stepped out of the SUV and looked up at a house that was not, in any way, what she had expected. It was a villa, or something close to it, the kind of American architecture that borrowed Italian bones and dressed them in Hudson Valley stone, sprawling across a hillside, with lights burning in several of its upper windows, and a long columned entrance that was lit by lanterns rather than floodlights, which gave it a warmth that was almost deceptive. Grounds she couldn't see the edges of in the dark, ivy on the east wing, a fountain dry in November, iron gates which were closing behind the SUV. She was somewhere in the outer city, she thought, or past it entirely. "This way," said the man from the car. He had gotten out just behind her and now stood at her shoulder, close but not touching. She noted this. He had not touched her once since she woke. She noted that, too. She followed him inside. The interior was warm and lit with the kind of deliberate taste that money buys when it has had time to develop opinions. Dark wood floors, original art, not the hotel chain kind, but pieces that someone had chosen because they meant something. A staircase curving upward, and to the left of it a hallway where 3 more men stood in quiet conference that ceased the moment she and her escort appeared. They all looked at him. He said nothing, simply walked past them, and they parted, and she followed. And she understood, without anyone explaining it, that whatever hierarchy existed in this house, she was currently walking behind its peak. The patient was in a room on the ground floor that had been converted into something between a field hospital and a surgery suite, imperfectly, but with real effort. She saw an IV stand, bags of saline, monitoring equipment that was not quite clinical grade, but was better than nothing. A medical kit that had been opened and partially used. On the table in the centre, not a proper operating table, just a dining table with the leaves removed and covered in plastic sheeting over towels. A man lay on his back, with his chest bare and his breathing shallow. Gianna crossed the room without being asked. The patient was large, wide through the shoulders, built like someone who had spent serious time cultivating that build. Dark hair, soaked with sweat, skin the colour of warm olive, drained now, pallid and wrong. He was conscious, barely, and his eyes tracked her as she leaned over him with the penlight she always carried in her coat pocket. 2 entry wounds, the medic, a squat man with nervous hands and genuine skill, she noted, said from the other side of the table. Right lung, partial collapse. Second one's lower, missed the major vessels by what I'd call a miracle. Exit wounds, both present. Chest drain in, but the right lung's still struggling. Infection risk? Managed. He's on IV antibiotics. Blood pressure? 90/60 and trending down. Not good. Not catastrophic, but not good. She shrugged off her coat, held out her hand for gloves, and started asking the precise and specific questions that she had been trained to ask, and the medic answered them, and the man on the table watched her with the kind of attention that she would not have expected from someone who was actively bleeding internally. "What's your name?" she asked the patient. His lips moved. "Nico," he said. His voice was ruined by pain, but still somehow carried that same quality she'd heard in the car. Not quite an accent, more like a cadence, Italian syllables that had been American smoothed, but not erased. Nico. She pressed 2 fingers gently against the right side of his chest, feeling the wrongness there. "I'm Gianna. I'm a surgeon. I'm going to fix this, but it's going to hurt first. I need you to stay with me." "Wasn't planning," he said, and paused to breathe, "on going anywhere." She almost smiled, didn't. "I need better lighting," she told the room at large. "I need the room cleared except for one assistant. I need someone to confirm you have the supplies I'm going to list, and I need them confirmed before I start, because once I start, I cannot stop." She looked up at the man from the car, who was standing near the door with his arms crossed and something carved into his face that was not quite worry, but was too close to it to be nothing. "That means you too." He looked at her for a moment. "Marco stays," he said. "The medic." "Fine. I'll be outside the door." "I don't care where you are," she said, "as long as you're not in here." She saw something shift in his expression. Again that almost amusement, brief and contained. Then he nodded once and left, and Gianna Romano turned back to the man on the table and became, entirely and without reservation, a surgeon. She worked for 3 hours and 40 minutes. The right lung was the primary concern. The partial collapse needed addressing, and the accumulated blood in the chest cavity needed draining, and the intercostal damage needed careful management. The lower wound was cleaner, mercifully. The bullet had missed the liver by a margin she would later describe to no one as obscene. The man's body had cooperated in the way that only truly fit bodies did, his physiology stubbornly insisting on survival despite everything that had been done to damage it. At one point, his blood pressure dropped sharply enough that she said quietly, "Don't you dare." And Marco looked at her, and then at the monitors, and then at her again. "Talking to the patient," she said, without looking up, and continued working. By the time she straightened, her back aching, her hands steady as ever, but the rest of her beginning to register exhaustion, the man named Nico was breathing better. Not well, not clean, but better. The monitors showed improvement. His colour had not fully returned, but had edged back from the particular grey-white of impending death to something more plausibly human. She stripped her gloves and walked to the door and opened it. The man from the car was there. He was seated in a chair in the hallway, jacket off, forearms on his knees, and he had been looking at the floor, but he looked up when she appeared, and there was a half-second before his expression reset, in which she saw, unmistakably, relief. "He'll live," she said. The man let out a breath, a single, controlled exhale. "Good. He needs monitoring through the night, vitals every 30 minutes. If his oxygen saturation drops below 92, you call me immediately. The chest drain needs to stay in for at least 48 hours, no movement, no food until I clear him. And he needs a proper hospital." "That isn't possible." "I know you're going to say that," she said, "but I want it documented that I said it." Documented. His mouth curved slightly. "By whom?" She looked at him steadily. "By you." A pause. "Considered documented," he said. "Come with me." She followed him down the hallway, through a door, and into a room that was clearly designed for living in. Softer lighting, a fireplace currently burning low, bookshelves, leather furniture the colour of cognac. He poured 2 glasses of something amber from a decanter without asking, and held one out to her. She took it because her hands were starting to shake slightly now that the adrenaline had committed to leaving her, and she needed something to hold. "Sit down," he said, "please." She sat. He stood. "My name is Luca Ferrante," he said. "Is that true?" she asked. He looked at her. "Mostly." "And the man I just operated on?" A pause that told her exactly how much he was deciding to give her. "Nico Barone." She knew the name. She didn't know why she knew the name. It surfaced from somewhere, a half-heard conversation, a headline glimpsed on a news screen in the hospital lobby. Barone. She let the recognition sit without chasing it. "What happens to me now?" she asked. Luca Ferrante looked into his glass. "You rest," he said, "and then, in the morning, we'll talk." She was given a room. This surprised her more than it probably should have. She had expected... She wasn't sure what she had expected. A locked basement, maybe. A cot. The room she was shown to was on the second floor and was larger than her bedroom at home, with a window that looked out over the dark grounds and a bed that had actual thread count and a private bathroom with towels that had probably been pressed. There was also, she noted immediately, no lock on the inside of the door. The window was painted shut. Third observation. She sat on the edge of the bed and let herself be afraid for approximately 4 minutes, which was the amount of time she could afford before she needed to start thinking clearly again. She felt the fear move through her. The adrenaline tremor, the hyper-awareness, the very particular terror of not knowing what came next. And then she took 2 slow breaths and let it become something quieter and more manageable, and started to assess. She was alive. She was physically unharmed. She had done what they wanted her to do, and she had done it well, and the man she'd been brought here to save was breathing. These were good facts. She did not know where she was. She did not have her phone. They had taken it in the car, politely, and she had let them because she had been gauging the situation and deciding what battles to pick. She did not know how many men were in this house, or whether they were the kind who would hurt her if she pushed against the walls of whatever was happening here. She thought about Luca Ferrante's face when she'd told him Nico would live. Relief. Real and unguarded, just for a moment. People who felt relief at someone's survival were not, generally, people who thought of humans as disposable. This was not a guarantee of anything. She knew enough about the world to know that men could love certain people ferociously, while treating everyone else as furniture. But it was a data point. She lay back on the bed without undressing, and stared at the ceiling, and eventually, because she was exhausted in the way only surgery produced, she slept. In the morning, she woke to sunlight through the window and the smell of coffee. There was a tray outside her door, which told her someone had been in the hallway, close enough to leave it without waking her, which was a careful and slightly unsettling level of quiet. Coffee, still hot, bread with oil and salt, a small bowl of olives, orange juice, Italian breakfast sensibilities. Interesting. She ate sitting cross-legged on the bed and looked out the window at what the daylight revealed. The grounds were extensive, manicured lawn going rough at the edges where the property met what looked like actual woodland. A gate in the distance, iron, with 2 figures near it. To the east, what might have been a guest house. No neighbouring buildings visible. Significant acreage, significant isolation. Hudson Valley, she thought, or Connecticut. After breakfast, she went to check on her patient. No one stopped her. The door to her room opened freely. She'd already known the lock was external, but she had not been certain it would remain unlocked in the morning. It did. Two men in the upstairs hallway glanced at her as she appeared, and one of them straightened, but neither of them moved toward her. She walked to the staircase and went down, and found the converted surgery room by memory. Marco was there, asleep in a chair with his arms folded, and Nico Barone was awake. More awake than she would have expected, frankly. He was still very much in the category of man who had been shot, pale and drawn, and clearly in significant pain, but his eyes, when they found her, were alert and sharp, and carrying an intelligence that she felt like something physical. "You're the doctor," he said. His voice was better than last night, rough but present. "Gianna Romano," she said, moving to the side of the table bed and beginning the visual assessment she always did before she touched, checking colour, checking the rise and fall of his chest, checking the drain. "How's your breathing?"
"Hurts." "It will for a while. How's the pain on a scale 7? He said, before she finished. "It was a 9 at 3 in the morning. Don't ask Marco. He'll say I was fine. He lies." "Marco," she said. The medic startled awake. "Vitals were stable through the night," he said immediately, the practiced reflex of a man who had slept lightly and been waiting for someone to need something. "Good. I want to check the chest drain, and then we're going to talk about next steps." She looked at Nico. "You need to be in a hospital." "No," he said. "I'm not asking your preference. I'm giving you a medical assessment, and I'm giving you an operational one." He held her gaze, and something passed between them. She couldn't have named it this first morning, but it was the beginning of something. The first filament of a thing that would grow, whether either of them wanted it to. "There are people who want to be dead, Dr. Romano. A hospital is a place those people can find me." "The people who shot you?" "Yes." "Who were they?" Something shifted in his face. Not pain, something older and harder. "Men I trusted," he said. She studied him for a moment. Then she put on her gloves and got to work, and he bore the examination with a stillness that she recognized as someone who had learned to manage pain by deciding it wasn't the most important thing in the room. "The lung is expanding better," she said. "You're lucky the lower wound missed what it missed." "I've been told I'm lucky before." His voice was dry. "Usually by people who don't know the full situation." "What's the full situation?" He looked at her. "Are you always this direct?" "I'm a surgeon. Indirection costs time, and time costs lives." "Yes." His mouth moved, just slightly, one corner, not enough to be called a smile, but maybe the idea of one. "I was shot by 2 of my own men," he said, "on the orders of someone who wants my organization. We were ambushed at a property in Brooklyn. My driver got me out, but I lost the others. Luca found me an hour later." He paused. "I assume Luca is why you're here." "He's the one who arranged my transportation, yes." "He's my—" Nico paused again, differently. "He handles things for me." She noted the hesitation, filed it. "How many people know you're here?" "As few as possible." "Then we have a problem," she said, "because what you need over the next 2 weeks is medical care that I can't adequately provide with a dining table and a field kit." "What do you need?" he asked. "Tell me specifically. I'll have it here by tonight." She looked at him for a moment. Then she picked up the notepad on the side table. Someone had placed it there for exactly this, she suspected, and began to write. She was halfway through the list when she heard the door open behind her. and felt, rather than saw, Luca Ferrante enter the room, and the quality of the air changed slightly, the way it does when someone with a significant amount of power walks into a space and all the people in it recalibrate unconsciously. "He's awake," Luca said, looking at Nico with that same controlled relief from last night, less hidden now in daylight. "Unfortunately for everyone," Nico said, "yes." "How do you feel?" "Like I've been shot twice." He paused. "She's good." Luca glanced at her, a brief, assessing look. "I know," he said. By noon, Gianna had compiled a list of medical supplies that would have stocked a small clinic. By 2 in the afternoon, a delivery arrived, 2 men carrying cases that she would not have believed could be assembled so quickly if she had not witnessed it. IV medications, monitoring equipment, sterile supplies, a portable ultrasound that still had the warranty sticker on it. Money, she was beginning to understand, was not a constraint here. She spent the afternoon setting up the room properly, directing Marco and a third man called Santi, who turned out to have field medic training from some military background he declined to specify, with the focused efficiency that her residents at the hospital knew well. By 4 o'clock, Nico Barone was monitoring properly, and the room had gone from improvised to something she could work with, if not what she would have chosen. She found Luca in the kitchen. It was a large kitchen, the kind designed for actual cooking. Stone counters, a range with too many burners, copper pots hanging from a rack overhead. He was standing at the counter with a coffee and a phone, and the kind of stillness that she was beginning to think was not natural calm, but rather something trained, something that had been built over years of needing to appear unmoved. He looked up when she came in, set the phone face down. "I need to make a call," she said. "No. I have colleagues who will be wondering. Your hospital has been told you have a family emergency," he said. "Personal leave has been arranged. Your phone has been returned to your apartment." She stared at him. "You went to my apartment?" To ensure nothing was disturbed, and to make the situation appear voluntary. "It is absolutely not voluntary." "I know that." He met her eyes. "I'm sorry." She was not expecting the apology. It caught her off guard in a way that the abduction itself hadn't, which said something about how well she'd processed the abduction, and something else about him. "How long?" she said. "How long for what?" "How long am I here?" He was quiet for a moment, looked into his coffee. She had the sense of watching someone do arithmetic, the fast, experienced kind, where the variables were not numbers but people and risks and probabilities she didn't have access to. "Until Nico can be moved safely," he said, "and until we've dealt with the men who shot him." "And how long is that?" 2 weeks, maybe 3. She absorbed this. "I need clothes." "Someone will go to your apartment. Give me a list." "I need my medical bag." "Tell me what's in it. It will be replicated." "I need—" She stopped. She had been about to say she needed her phone, her freedom, her life back. But she already knew the answer to all of those, and repetition would not change it. She looked at him and decided to change tactics entirely. "I need to understand what the arrangement is, clearly. Not, you're safe, we'll discuss terms. I want the actual terms." He nodded, pulled out the chair across from him at the kitchen island. "Sit." She sat. He remained standing, not looming but upright, and she noticed that he always chose the position that gave him the most information about the room. Back to the wall, sight lines to both doors. "You treat Nico," he said. "He recovers. When he's stable enough to travel, he goes to a secured location in Italy, which has proper medical facilities. You will be returned home with compensation for your time, and with the understanding that what you saw and did here was never seen and never done. And if I choose to speak about it when I'm home, a pause, I would advise against that.
Is that a threat? It's an honest assessment of the consequences, he said, and something in his voice made her understand that the honesty was genuine, that he was not posturing. The people who shot Nico have significant reach. If they learn you were involved in his recovery, your name becomes a liability to them. The safest version of your future is one in which you are, as far as the world is concerned, simply a surgeon who took emergency family leave. And the most dangerous version is one in which you make it known that you know anything, he said very quietly. She understood. She sat with it for a moment, the terrible clarity of it, how efficiently constructed the trap was. She had been brought here not just because she was skilled, but because the longer she stayed, the more she knew, and the more she knew, the more invested everyone was in ensuring her silence. It was elegant, in the way that very bad situations often were. "You could have told me this without the chloroform," she said. He had the decency to look uncomfortable. Possibly, but there was no time and too much risk. He paused. "I told them not to hurt you." "Chloroform isn't ideal, I know." His jaw tightened slightly. "It was a failure of planning on my part. There should have been another way." She looked at him for a long moment. He did not look away. She appreciated that about him, the willingness to hold eye contact during an uncomfortable conversation, the refusal to deflect or minimize. It didn't make any of this acceptable. It did make him, in some very specific way, easier to deal with than she might have expected. "Fine," she said. "I'll treat him, but I have conditions." Something shifted in his expression, that slight movement she was learning to read as his version of surprised. "Go ahead." "I don't want to be followed inside the house. I'll follow whatever security protocol you have for the exterior, but inside I move freely." "Agreed." "I want daily access to medical journals. I may need to consult on specific procedures, and I need current literature. We have internet in the East Wing, secured. I'll arrange access." "And I want to know what happened," she said. "Not everything. I'm not naive enough to think I get everything, but enough to understand the situation I'm in. Because right now I'm practicing medicine in the dark, and that's never—" "It's not," he started. "Not just medically," she said. "If the people who shot Nico are looking for him, and this house is on their list, then being kept in the dark about that risk makes me less safe, not more. You said you don't want to hurt me, then don't keep me ignorant." He stared at her. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, through the window, she could see one of the guards making his rounds along the perimeter of the lawn, unhurried, with a coat against the November cold. "You're not what I expected," Luca said. "What did you expect?" He considered this seriously. "Fear," he said. "More of it." "I told you, I'm afraid." "I've just also decided it's not useful right now." She looked at him. "Do we have a deal?" He held out his hand across the kitchen island. She looked at it. Then she shook it, and his grip was firm and brief, and when he let go, she felt the absence of it more than she would have liked. Over the next 3 days, Gianna learned the rhythms of the house. The guards rotated in 8-hour shifts, 3 on at any given time, plus Luca, who operated on no shift she could discern, but seemed to simply always be present.
Meals appeared at roughly predictable intervals, prepared by a man called Dante, who had the body language of someone who had been a soldier long before he became a cook, and who made a bolognese on the second night that was, despite everything, extraordinary. She checked Nico's vitals every morning and every evening. The chest drain stayed in. His oxygen saturation climbed steadily upward. By the third day, he was sitting partially upright, and by the fourth, he was asking for things. First, coffee. Absolutely not, she said. He looked at her with the patience of a man who fully intended to get what he wanted, but was willing to negotiate. Tea? Water and electrolytes. You're cruel. I'm your doctor. She adjusted the monitoring lead on his wrist. You have 2 bullet wounds healing simultaneously and a lung that is only doing approximately 80% of what it should. Caffeine raises your heart rate and blood pressure. The answer is no. For how long? Another week, minimum. He made a sound that was somewhere between irritation and resignation. She was beginning to learn his sounds, the particular cadence of his silences, the way his breathing changed when the pain sharpened, the quality of his attention when he was thinking about something versus simply watching her work. He watched her work a great deal. You were trained in New York, he said on the 4th morning. Columbia for med school, she said, then residency at Presbyterian. Why? Your hands, he said. The way you work. There's no waste. I was taught by a very impatient surgeon who considered unnecessary movement a form of moral failure. She checked his wound, the lower one, which was clean and healing well. Stop moving. I'm barely breathing. That's an exaggeration. She pressed gently and felt him absorb the pain without flinching, which was becoming familiar. You have a high pain tolerance. I've had practice, he said, and she did not ask at what, because she was fairly certain she knew at what, and because she was not sure she was ready to hear the answer in the matter-of-fact tone he would use to give it. Where did you grow up? She asked instead. A pause. New York, he said. Brooklyn originally. Then my family relocated. Italy? For a time. He was quiet for a moment. My father was from Palermo. Was? He died when I was young. She said nothing, covered the wound, moved to check the chest drain. You speak Italian? He asked. My mother is from Florence. I grew up bilingual. Something changed in his face, not a dramatic shift, but a warming, subtle and specific, like a house that has been cold for a long time, getting the first real fire in the hearth. Say something, he said. She looked at him over her shoulder. Something. In Italian. She turned back to what she was doing. Il drenaggio sembra buono, she said. The drain looks good. A silence. Then, you sound like my grandmother, he said, and there was something in his voice she couldn't quite categorize. Not grief, exactly, but the echo of something once loved that was now only a shape. Is that good or bad? Good, he said. She was the only person I was ever afraid of. She glanced at him. He was looking at the ceiling with an expression she was learning to read as the one he wore when he permitted himself to feel something he would not normally acknowledge. It made him look, briefly, like a man, rather than whatever he was when the armor was fully engaged. I'll take that as a compliment, she said, and went back to work, and neither of them mentioned it again. On the 5th day, Luca told her what had happened. He came to find her in the East Wing, where she had set up a small workspace at a desk near the secured computer terminal.
She was reviewing literature on thoracic recovery and drinking the strong coffee that Dante had begun leaving for her at 7 each morning without being asked. Luca sat in the chair across the desk and told her. Nico Barone ran. She already knew this, had already confirmed it for herself. One of the most significant organized crime operations on the eastern seaboard. Had inherited it from his uncle 12 years ago and had expanded it and, by most accounts, made it significantly more difficult to prosecute by being methodical and careful in a business that rewarded recklessness too often and too enthusiastically. 3 weeks ago, 2 of his lieutenants, men who had been with the organization for years, men Nico had trusted, promoted, protected, had made contact with a rival family from Chicago. The arrangement? Nico's removal. The territory divided between the traitors and the Chicago outfit. Everyone profits. The ambush in Brooklyn had been the execution of that plan. It had almost worked. Nico's driver, a man called Renzo, who had been with him since before he took over the organization and who had apparently decided personal loyalty trumped operational protocol, had gotten him out of the car and into the vehicle that brought him here. Renzo was dead, had gone back to buy time and not come out. Gianna absorbed this with her hands around her coffee cup and a feeling in her chest that was grief for a man she'd never met, because Nico's voice, when Luca mentioned Renzo's name, had done something specific and controlled, and she recognized it because she had heard that same control in family members at the hospital, the people who had learned that the only way to survive loss was to not let it knock you over while you still needed to stand. "He doesn't know about Renzo," she said. Luca looked at her. "No. He'll need to," she paused, "when he's stronger." "I know," he said. He stopped. His jaw moved. "Yes." She looked at him for a moment. "How long have you known him?" 20 years, Luca said, "since we were boys." Not employer, she thought. Not even right hand. Brother. She said nothing. Some things didn't need to be named to be understood. On the 7th day of her captivity, she still thought of it as captivity, still needed that word to anchor herself, because the alternative was to start thinking of it as something else, and she was not ready for that. Gianna found a library. It was on the 2nd floor, behind a door she had assumed was a closet. She opened it on her way back from the East Wing and found bookshelves. Real ones, extensive, the kind that implied genuine reading rather than decoration. The collection was eclectic in the way that books collected over many years and moved between multiple homes tended to be. Italian novels, legal texts, history, a surprising amount of poetry. A shelf of medical texts that stopped abruptly about 10 years ago, as if someone had stopped maintaining a collection when their interest shifted elsewhere. She ran her finger along the spines, looked at the medical texts more closely. Surgical guides, anatomy references, a volume on wound management that was specific enough to be professional rather than general. And on the very end of the shelf, tucked in slightly sideways, as if placed there temporarily and then forgotten, a slim book with no title on the spine. She pulled it out. It was an accounting ledger. Old, the cover soft with handling, the pages dense with figures and dates and codes she couldn't immediately pass. She turned to the first page. No name. The entries were in Italian and in what she suspected was some form of organizational shorthand. She almost put it back. Then she saw a date in the upper corner of one page. 27 years ago. She stood in the library for a long moment with the ledger in her hands and the particular, terrible feeling of something approaching, not quite memory, because she had been too young, but the shape of something she had been told about, the outline of a thing. Her father had been an accountant. Her father had disappeared when she was 10. She put the ledger back exactly as she had found it, sideways on the end of the shelf, and walked back to her room and sat on the bed and thought very carefully about what she knew and what she didn't, and what it might mean. Her father, Matteo Romano, had been a financial specialist who worked, as far as 8-year-old Gianna had understood it, for various businesses. He had travelled frequently. He had brought her gelato from Manhattan when he came home, and had taught her chess, and had sung old Neapolitan songs in the kitchen when he thought no one was listening. He had been, in her memory, a gentle man, a careful man, a man who thought before he spoke, and who seemed, sometimes, to be carrying something very heavy that he never set down. He had gone to work one morning when she was 10 and had not come home. The official explanation, delivered to her mother by 2 men she'd never seen before, was that he had suffered an accident, a car accident. There was a closed casket, and her mother had never, in the 23 years since, been willing to discuss the circumstances in any detail, and Gianna had learned to understand this silence as the kind that meant danger rather than simply grief. She had grown up. She had become a doctor. She had told herself the not knowing was bearable because she had made something of herself, and the not knowing was simply part of her history, like a room in a house you had learned to walk past without looking at. Now she sat in a Mafia boss's villa and thought about a ledger on a shelf and wondered if the room had always been right there, waiting for her to open the door. She did not tell anyone what she had found. Instead, she went to check on Nico and found him sitting up with more authority than before, and the improvement in his colour and his breathing was genuine enough that she felt the particular warm satisfaction of medicine working the way it was supposed to. "You look better," she said. "I feel terrible," he said, "but I've been reliably informed these are incompatible only in healthy people." She pulled up the chair. He watched her with those dark eyes that had become, over the week, increasingly specific in the way they watched her. Not generalized attention, but something directed, something that knew where to look. "I want to ask you something," she said. "You've been wanting to ask something for several days," he said. "I've been waiting." "How do you know?" "You have a face that thinks out loud," he said. "When you're managing a problem, something moves behind your eyes, like watching someone sort a room through a window." She considered this. "That's very observant." "It's a professional skill," he said simply. She looked at him. Then, "How long has your family been in New York?" A slight change in his attention. "My family has been operating in New York since the 80s, he said. "Why?" "Who managed the financial side of the organization, historically?" The change in his attention deepened, sharpened, rather, the way attention does when it locks on to something significant. He was quiet for a moment, too quiet, she thought, for a casual answer to a casual question. "Several people over the years," he said carefully. "Why are you asking?" "My father," she said, "was an accountant." Silence. Outside, the November wind moved through the trees at the edge of the property, a sound like the house breathing. Nico Barone lay in his improvised hospital bed and looked at Gianna Romano, and something moved through his expression that was not pain and was not ease, and was instead the complex rearrangement of a man recalculating something significant. "What was your father's name?" he said. "Matteo Romano," she said. "He disappeared when I was 10 years old." Another silence, longer. "I see," said Nico Barone very quietly, and she understood from those 2 words alone that he knew the name. He didn't tell her that night. She had expected him to, had prepared herself for it or tried to, sitting in that chair with her hands folded and her face composed in the way she had learned to compose it when delivering or receiving news that required steadiness. But Nico simply said, "That's a conversation for when I'm upright." And she understood this was not deflection, but something more specific. A man who intended to be honest with her, and had decided that honesty of this kind required a certain posture. That you should not be flat on your back when you told someone a difficult truth. She respected that. She hated it, but she respected it. She went back to her room and lay awake for a long time. She thought about her mother, Elena Romano, who had raised her alone in a 2-bedroom apartment in Astoria after Matteo disappeared, who had worked nights at a restaurant and days at a dry cleaner's, and had somehow, through sheer unnameable determination, gotten Gianna through private school and then college and then medical school, who had never spoken about Matteo beyond the bare minimum required by grief and practicality, who had, once, when Gianna was perhaps 15 and going through the particular agony of that age, said, "Your father loved you more than he loved being safe. That's all you need to know." Gianna had thought for years that this was simply her mother's way of closing a wound with a bandage that was pretty enough to not look away from. Now she wondered if it had been a warning. She also thought about the way Nico had said, "I see." The weight behind it, the recognition, and about the ledger on the library shelf, and about a man who had done the accounts for an organization like this one, who had known its secrets, and who had then disappeared. She thought about what happened to people who knew too much. She thought about whether she was currently becoming one of them. On the 8th day, Nico was able to stand. Gianna watched him do it from the doorway, having heard the argument from the hallway and come to intervene. Marco was protesting earnestly and at some volume, and Nico was ignoring him with the focused patience of a man who had been told no so many times that he had developed a selective deafness to it. "Absolutely not," she said from the doorway. Both men turned. "My legs are fine," Nico said. "Your lung has been punctured. You have 2 healing wound tracks, and you've been horizontal for a week. Your legs may be fine. The rest of you is not," she said. "Sit down." He looked at her. She held his gaze. There was a long moment in which the room rearranged itself around the contest of their 2 wills, and she was aware, acutely, uncomfortably aware, that this man was accustomed to winning contests of will, that in every room he had ever stood in, probably, the force of his personality had been sufficient to determine the outcome. He sat down. Marco made a small sound that was either relief or amazement. 10 minutes, Nico said. I stood for 10 minutes, sitting up, standing. Progression. Medically accurate, she conceded. But not today, and not without supervision. Tomorrow morning, with me present, you can stand for 5 minutes. 10. 7. Something crossed his face, and this time it was unmistakably amusement, genuine and unguarded, there and gone like a match lit in a dark room. 7, he said. Fine. She crossed the room and checked his vitals with more attention than she needed to give them, because the amusement in his face had done something to her that she needed a moment to address privately, and looking at the monitor was as good a method of not looking at him as any. "You're healing faster than I'd expect," she said. "Good stock," he said. "Stubbornness, more like." She straightened, found him watching her. "What?" "Nothing," he said. "You have—" He paused. "You remind me of someone." "Your grandmother," she said without thinking. Something warm moved through his expression. "No," he said, "not my grandmother." He looked at her steadily. "Someone I haven't thought about in a long time." She didn't ask who. She wasn't sure she wanted to know, and she was very sure she didn't want to examine why she was unsure. That evening, Luca found her in the kitchen again. She had developed the habit of sitting at the kitchen island in the evenings, reading or making notes. It had begun as pure practicality. The East Wing study was cold, and the kitchen was warm, but had become, without her fully deciding this, a social habit. The kitchen was where people passed through, where Dante cooked and occasionally, as he worked, said things that were not quite addressed to her, but were not quite addressed to the room either. Where Luca sometimes appeared with a glass of something and stood at the counter in the way that she was beginning to understand meant he needed to not be alone with whatever he was thinking about. Tonight he poured her a glass of the Barolo that she had begun to recognize as his default offer. She accepted it. "He asked about you today," Luca said. She looked up from her notes. "Medically?" "No." He turned his glass in his hands. "He asked what you were like before, when we came for you." She absorbed this. "What did you tell him?" "That you didn't scream," Luca said, "and that you asked for his blood type before we reached the house." She looked down at her glass. "He knew my father," she said. Luca was quiet for a moment. "I know." The particular temperature of that silence, the specific texture of it, the implication it carried, straightened something in her spine. "How long have you known?" "Since before we came for you," he said. He met her eyes, and the honesty in them was unambiguous and uncomfortable. "Nico chose you specifically, not just because you were the best available surgeon, because of who you were." She sat with this. "He wanted to be the one to tell you," Luca said, "about your father." "And what is he going to tell me?" she asked, very carefully. Luca looked at his wine. "That he was a good man," he said, "who got into something he didn't understand until it was too late to get out of, and who, when the time came, chose to protect his family over himself." He paused. "That's all I'll say. The rest is Nico's to give you." She sat very still for a very long time, and Luca Ferrante, to his credit, did not try to fill the silence. In the morning she helped Nico stand. She had not slept well, had lain in the dark with Luca's words turning over and over, with the shape of what she was about to learn pressing against her from all sides, with the knowledge that the answer to the question she had carried for 23 years was in this house, and she would have it soon. She had gotten up at 5 and sat with coffee she didn't taste until the sky outside the window went from black to the dark blue that preceded dawn. By the time she knocked on Nico's door at 8, she had made herself calm, had folded everything she was feeling into a smaller shape and put it somewhere manageable, the way she did before surgery when the case was difficult and the room needed a surgeon rather than a person. He was sitting up when she came in, dressed, which she had not expected. Someone had brought clothes, a dark shirt, loose pants, and he had managed the shirt himself, though it must have cost him significantly, and the effort was visible in the slight tension around his eyes and the extra care of his breathing. "You got dressed," she said. "Dignity," he said, "has a medical value that is consistently underestimated." She suppressed a response to that and did her checks, vitals, wound inspection, a brief percussion assessment of his chest, and everything was, allowing for the fact that it had been 8 days since 2 bullets had passed through his body, acceptable. "All right," she said. "Stand up, slowly." He stood. She stayed close enough to catch him if his legs betrayed him, which she didn't think they would, but which was her professional responsibility to be prepared for. He rose to his full height, and she found herself acutely conscious of the difference in it. She was 5'6", and he was several inches above 6 feet, and the room rearranged itself when he was upright in a way it hadn't when he was horizontal. He stood there, breathed, checked in with himself in the quiet, interior way she had noticed he did everything, not performing, not narrating, just attending. "How does it feel?" she asked. "Like something that will pass," he said. He looked down at her, the angle of it, the directness of those dark eyes at close range, and she held her ground. "You look like you didn't sleep. I'm the one assessing your health, not the reverse." "I've been lying in bed for a week," he said. "I've had nothing to do but look at things. I notice details." He paused. "You're worried about what I'm going to tell you." "I'm a doctor who is appropriately concerned about a patient's recovery." "Gianna," he said, her name in his mouth, not Dr. Romano, not the formal address he had used in the beginning, just her name, and something about the way he said it, the ease of it, the intimacy of it, made her take one small, involuntary breath. "Sit down," she said. 7 minutes is done." He sat, and she moved to the other side of the room under the pretense of noting something on the chart she had created on a yellow legal pad. And when she turned back, he was watching her with that cataloguing attention, and he said, "I'll tell you about your father today." "When you're ready," she said, and meant it. "I'm ready." He paused. "I've been ready for a long time. I just didn't know when I'd have the chance." She pulled up the chair, sat down, folded her hands in her lap. "My uncle ran the family before me," Nico began. "He was not a kind man. Not cruel for the sake of it. Cruelty for its own sake is amateurism, and he was not an amateur. But indifferent to the cost of things, indifferent to the human weight of decisions." He paused. "Your father came to work for him when you were maybe 5 or 6. He was referred by someone who vouched for his discretion and his skill, and both of those things were true. Matteo Romano was extraordinarily skilled. He could look at a set of books and understand in minutes what it had taken others days to construct." She was listening with her whole body. "He worked for my uncle for 4 years, Nico said, "and during those 4 years he documented everything, every transaction, every account, every movement of money, carefully, quietly. He was, in the language of a thing I'm not going to call by its correct name, building a case." "He was going to go to the FBI," she said. "Yes," Nico said. "He had made contact. He was months away from—" from moving your mother and you somewhere safe and then providing testimony that would have been significantly damaging to my uncle's operation. He paused again. My uncle found out. The kitchen clock in some other part of the house ticked. Outside, a bird. November light through the window. "Did your uncle—" she started. "No," Nico said. "He didn't kill him." He held her gaze. "He had him removed and relocated. There is a man living under a different name in a small town outside Pescara who is, as far as I know, alive and well, and very aware that the arrangement requires his silence in exchange for his continued existence." She sat very still. "Your father is alive," Nico said. "He has been alive this entire time." She stood up so fast the chair scraped. Nico watched her, and whatever he saw in her face made him stay quiet. The right choice, she would think later, because she needed a moment in which no one spoke and no one tried to manage what she was feeling, which was too large and too various and too fast-moving to be managed anyway. Her father was alive. 23 years. Her mother's careful silence, the closed casket, the two men at the door who had delivered the news with the practiced neutrality of people delivering a message they had delivered before. Her mother working nights at a restaurant and days at a dry cleaner's, and never once breaking, never once cracking, raising Gianna with both hands and a determination that had felt her whole life like grief sublimated into function. Her mother had known. She turned to face the window, pressed one hand against the wall beside it, not for support. She was not going to collapse. Her legs were fine, everything physical was fine, but because she needed something solid under her palm, something real. "My mother knew," she said, not a question. "She was told he had died," Nico said from behind her. "My uncle's men told her he died in the accident. She was not told the truth." She breathed. "I don't know if she suspected," he said carefully. I was 17 when this happened. I was not involved in my uncle's operations yet. I learned about it years later, and by then—" He paused. "By then I had taken over, and the situation had been in place for so long that disturbing it seemed like it would cause more damage than it healed. That was the reasoning I used." Another pause, quieter. "I have not been certain, since you arrived here, that the reasoning was sound." She turned around. He was sitting with his hands loose on his knees and looking at her with the directness that she had come to understand was his version of openness. Eyes unguarded, no performance, just the unmediated fact of him watching her and letting her see that he was watching. "You could have told me the first day," she said. "Yes. Why didn't you?" "Because you were my surgeon," he said, "and because what I was asking you to do was already enormous, and adding this—" He shook his head slightly. "I needed you to be a doctor first. I needed your hands steady." She thought about this. Thought about whether she would have been able to operate, really operate, cleanly and without emotional interference, if she had known, the night she arrived, that this man had information about her father. Thought about the precision required, the clarity, the absolute present tense demand of surgery. "That was calculated," she said. "Yes," he said, "it was." "I should be angry about that." "Yes," he said again, "you should." She looked at him. "Give me his address," she said. A pause. "It's not that simple." It's exactly that simple. You know where he is. Give me the address. If you contact him without preparation, without the right protocols, the arrangement collapses. My uncle's men, or what's left of them, are still monitoring. Your father's safety is contingent on the arrangement holding. Your uncle is still alive. He's in a federal prison, has been for 8 years. But organizations don't dissolve when the leader is arrested. There are people who have been maintaining the monitoring protocol because it's the only insurance they have against your father's testimony ever resurfacing. She sat back down. The anger was still there, enormous and jagged and looking for somewhere to go, but underneath it was something else, something that took her a moment to identify as gratitude. Terrible, unwanted gratitude, because she had known nothing, and now she knew, and knowing even this was better. "When this is over," she said, "when you're stable and the situation with the men who shot you is resolved, I want his address." "You'll have it," Nico said. She looked at him for a long time. He looked back. "Does it change things?" he asked, "knowing why you were specifically chosen?" "You chose me because you owed my family a debt," she said. "I chose you because you were the best," he said. "The debt was—" he paused. "The debt was why I wanted it to be you, not just anyone. You." Something about the way he said it, the specificity of the last 2 words, the weight he gave them, made the air in the room change in a way she could not explain clinically and chose not to examine. "Your oxygen saturation," she said, reaching for the monitor with hands that were only slightly unsteady, "needs checking." "Gianna," he said. "Don't," she said, "not right now. Let me—" She closed her eyes briefly. "Let me be a doctor right now, just for a little while longer." A pause. Then, very quietly, "All right." 10 days in, and the villa had become, in the way that places do when you inhabit them long enough, something closer to real than provisional. Gianna knew which floorboard on the second landing creaked and which didn't. She knew that the East Wing study got real sun between 10 and 1, and that the kitchen window faced west, so the evenings there were orange and gold. She knew that Dante made coffee at 6 in the morning, strong enough to constitute a medical event, and that Santi played cards with the night shift guard at 3 a.m. and always lost, and never seemed to mind. She knew that the library on the second floor had a chair by the window that was worn in the exact right place, and she had begun spending an hour there each evening, reading whatever came to hand. She also knew that Luca arrived in the kitchen at 9 each night, after his last round of whatever operational work occupied him during the day. Calls she never heard clearly, meetings with men who came and went in dark cars, long sessions in the room at the end of the ground floor hall that she had identified as his command center. He arrived at 9, poured 2 glasses, and on the evenings she was in the kitchen when he arrived, they talked. She had learned that he had grown up in Bensonhurst, that his mother had died when he was 12, and he had been, in his own spare phrasing, collected by the Barone organization shortly after, which she understood to mean that he had fallen into the orbit of the family's world, the way children in certain neighborhoods did, not recruited so much as absorbed, the gravity of a powerful structure pulling in the bodies closest to it. That he had been with Nico since they were teenagers, and that this loyalty was not, as far as she could tell, the performed kind. It was structural, the load-bearing kind. "You're worried about him," she said on the 10th evening.
Luca turned his glass. I'm always worried about him. There's a particular kind of worried right now, she said. You've been checking in with the guards more than usual. He looked at her. You pay attention. Professional habit. He was quiet for a moment. We're getting closer to identifying the men who ordered the hit, he said, which means they're getting more desperate. Desperate men make unpredictable choices. How close is this house to being compromised? Not close, he said, but not impossible. He met her eyes. I would tell you if I thought you were in immediate danger. I believe you, she said, and realized as she said it that this was true. That somewhere in the past 10 days, the question of whether she trusted Luca Ferrante had moved from open to resolved, without her quite deciding to close it. He looked slightly surprised, as if trust, freely offered, was not something he encountered often enough to expect. You should go check on him, she said. You've been in here for 20 minutes and your glass is still full. He looked down at the wine. He prefers your company to mine right now, he said. I think he finds my worry more exhausting than yours. My worry is medical. Yours is personal. Yes, that's different to receive. Luca nodded slowly. You're good at this, he said. Not just the medicine, the reading people. I work in trauma surgery, she said. You learn to read fast. She went to check on Nico. He was awake, which was not unusual at this hour. He slept badly. She had noticed the evidence, the light under his door at 2 and 3 a.m., the slightly bruised quality of his eyes in the mornings. She had attributed it to pain, and then, as the pain decreased, had revised her attribution to something else. The particular insomnia of a man whose mind was too active for the inactivity his body currently required. Still up, she said, coming in. Still checking on me, he said. It's my job. At 11 o'clock at night? You're my only patient, she said. The hours are unusual. She moved to the chair, his chair, the one she always pulled close to the bed, the one that had become, over 10 days, specifically hers in the geography of this room. He had been reading. He set the book down when she came in, which he always did, always gave her his full attention, without being asked, without apparent effort, as if the interruption was something he welcomed rather than accommodated. Luca looks tired, she said. He always looks tired. He's been managing other people's crises for 20 years and refusing to acknowledge the cost. He paused. How are you? She looked at him. I'm the one who asks that. You ask it about my lung, he said. I'm asking about you. She considered deflecting, considered the professional distance she had maintained, mostly, with the occasional serious failure, over the past 10 days. Considered that it was 11 o'clock at night, and she had been in this house for 10 days, and the man in front of her knew where her father was, and she had told him things she had not told most people in her life, simply because the situation they were in created a strange intimacy that she could not fully armor against. I'm processing, she said, what you told me about my father. Are you angry? Yes, she said, at your uncle, at the situation, at the 23 years. She paused. Not at you. I've tried to be, a little. It would be simpler. Something in his face acknowledged this, the honesty of it, the complexity of it. I understand. I dreamed about my mother last night, she said. She was in her restaurant uniform, the one she wore when I was 12, and I was trying to tell her he was alive, and she couldn't hear me. Silence. Tell her, Nico said, when you go home.
Tell her first, before you do anything else." "I will." She paused. "Will you really give me the address? Honestly?" "Yes," he said. "I'll do more than that. I'll make contact. I'll ensure the protocols are managed so that it can be done safely." He held her gaze. "I told you I would. I don't say things I don't intend." She believed him. This too had become, without ceremony, resolved. She sat with him for another hour, and they talked about nothing in particular. Books, the kind of surgeon she had trained under, a city in Sicily he described with the accuracy of someone who loved it, and the fire burned down in its grate, and outside the window the grounds were dark and very still. When she finally stood to leave, he said, "Gianna." Just her name. She looked back. "Thank you," he said, "for my life." She held his gaze for a moment. "Don't waste it," she said. And she went to her room and lay in the dark and felt the particular confusion of a woman who had come here as a captive and was no longer sure that word was sufficient for what she was. On the 12th day, Nico walked the length of the hallway. It was Gianna's idea and her supervision. 5 steps, pause, assess, 5 more. But his execution, carried out with the focused stubbornness she had come to think of as essentially him. His breathing was controlled and deliberate, and she stayed at his side and tried not to be aware of the warmth of him, the sheer physical presence of a man who had been shot twice and was walking a hallway with the bearing of someone who considered the process of recovery to be, at most, a temporary inconvenience. "Your chest is tightening," she said. "Yes." "Tell me before it becomes a problem." "If it becomes a problem," he said, "you'll see it before I say it. You always do." This was true. She had noticed that he was not someone who complained about symptoms, not from stoicism, she had decided, but from a deep-rooted disinclination to need anything from anyone, which was a very specific kind of damage that she recognized without being asked to diagnose it. "You're going to need to learn to report symptoms like a normal patient," she said. "I'm not a normal patient." "Medically speaking, all patients are normal patients." "Medically speaking," he said, with the very slight inflection that was his version of a smile, "all doctors are normal doctors." She let that one go. They turned at the end of the hallway, and she tracked his breathing and his colour and the precise way he was managing the discomfort. "Well," was the answer, better than she might have expected a week ago, which meant that either his pain tolerance was genuinely remarkable, or his baseline fitness was extraordinary enough to have survived significant damage and continued compensating. Probably both. On the way back, they passed the library door. "You've been in there," he said, not a question. "I found the books," she said. "I hope that was all right." "Of course." He paused. "What did you find?" She decided to be honest. "The shelf with the medical texts, and a ledger at the end of it." He looked at her. "Which ledger?" "Old. No name on the spine. Italian entries with shorthand I didn't recognize." She kept her voice neutral. "About 27 years old." He walked 3 more steps in silence. Then, "My uncle's, originally. It came to me with the rest of the estate." He paused again. "I should have disposed of it." "Why didn't you?" Another pause, this one longer. "Some things you keep," he said, "even when you shouldn't. Evidence of a life, even one you didn't choose." She thought about her mother's photograph albums, which did not contain a single image of her father
after a certain date. Not removed, she had always believed, but simply never taken. A life maintained at the edges because looking directly at it was not survivable. "I understand that," she said. He looked at her. There was something in the look, an acknowledgement, specific and quiet, of the fact that she genuinely did understand, that she was not offering a social courtesy, but a real recognition. Something passed between them that she did not try to name, and that he did not try to manage. And then they were back at his room, and she was saying, "That's enough for today." And he was saying, "Tomorrow the courtyard." And she was saying, "We'll see." And this too was, she realized, a rhythm, their own specific rhythm, built over 12 days without being designed. That night, she found him in the library. She had not been able to sleep. The awareness of the ledger had nagged at her through the evening, and at midnight she had given up on her book and gone down the hall and opened the library door and found him there, sitting in her chair by the window with a lamp on and the ledger in his hands. He looked up when she came in. "Couldn't sleep?" she said. "Clearly neither could you," he said. She crossed the room. He shifted slightly. Not to give her the chair, she realized, but to make space on the arm of it, which was not enough space for two people, but was an invitation, unmistakably, and she sat on the ottoman near his feet instead, and he let this pass without comment. "What does it say?" she asked, looking at the ledger. "Accounts," he said. "Money in, money out, in the language my uncle used for it." He turned a page. "Your father's entries are distinctive. He had a particular method. The figures are organized differently than the others, more precise, the kind of precision that comes from someone who actually understands what he's looking at, rather than someone who is simply recording." She looked at the page he had turned to. Dense columns of figures, the handwriting she was looking at. "Is that his handwriting?" she said. "Yes." She reached out and touched the page, one finger lightly on the edge of a column. She did not let herself feel too much, contained it, compressed it. But Nico was watching her, and whatever he saw in her face made him close the ledger gently. "You can have it," he said. She looked up. "What?" "When you leave, it's yours. It should be yours." She sat with this for a moment. "Why do you have it?" she asked. "Why keep it here specifically?" He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I came here 2 years ago when I needed to think about something difficult. I brought things from the estate that I didn't want in the city, things I hadn't decided what to do with." He looked at the cover of the ledger. "I'd been thinking about your father's situation for a while, about what was owed, about what correcting it would look like. And then you got shot," she said. "And then I got shot," he agreed, and there was a wryness to it, a dark humour, and she almost laughed, the inappropriate pressure-release kind of laugh, and he heard the edge of it, and his mouth curved. "Go to sleep," he said. "Your patient needs you functional tomorrow." "My patient," she said, "needs to already be asleep." "My doctor," he said, very quietly, looking at her with those mahogany eyes in the lamplight, "is not helping." She stood up. He watched her go. At the doorway she paused, and she was not sure why she paused, only that it felt necessary, some acknowledgement of the hour and the room and the weight of what they had been saying. "Nico," she said. He looked at her. "Thank you," she said, "for the ledger." Something moved in his face, something open and undefended that he didn't bother to put away. "Get some sleep, Gianna," he said. She did, and for the first time since she'd been brought here, she slept through.
On the 14th day, the threat arrived. She was in the east wing when she heard it. Not a sound, but a shift, a change in the atmosphere of the house, the quality of the silence hardening into something alert. She heard footsteps, 2 pairs, moving faster than the normal rhythm of the guards' rounds. Heard a door close with deliberate quietness, which was worse than a slam. She found Luca in the hallway outside Nico's room. "Stay inside," he said, not unkindly, but firmly. "What's happening?" "A situation." That's not an answer. He looked at her. His face had shifted into something she hadn't seen on it before. The professional face, the operational one, the face of a man who was managing something with very high stakes and no margin. "We have reason to believe our location has been partially identified," he said. "Not confirmed, but possible. I need you to stay with Nico. Don't open the windows. Don't use the internet connection." He paused. "Can you do that? Can you tell me what partially identified means in practical terms?" "It means we may need to move," he said, "within hours." She processed this. "He can't be moved safely. The chest drain." "I know. We're working on options." He held her gaze. "I need you not to panic." "I'm not panicking," she said. "I'm assessing. Those are different things." Something shifted in his face. "I know," he said. "That's why I'm telling you." He put one hand briefly on her arm. Not a grip, just a touch, quick and gone. "Go to him. He'll want to know what's happening, and I need him to stay in that bed." She went. Nico, when she entered, was already sitting up, with the particular stillness of a man who has detected a change in the atmosphere through walls and cannot do anything about it, and is finding this circumstance approximately intolerable. "Sit down," she said. "I can hear—" "I know what you can hear. Sit down and let me check you over, and then I'll tell you what Luca told me." He sat. She worked quickly. Vitals, the drain, his breathing, all of it, and the numbers were good as they'd been, and she told him what Luca had said, and watched his face go through a rapid, controlled sequence of responses. "He'll handle it," Nico said. "I know he will," she said. "I'm telling you so you don't try to get up and go handle it yourself." He looked at her, and there was a flash of something, irritation, not at her, she thought, but at the situation, at the specific indignity of being stationary when your world was moving without you. She recognized this as the feeling her patients sometimes had when they woke from surgery and found themselves immobilized by their own body's needs, and she knew there was no medicine for it except time and the company of someone who acknowledged the frustration as real. "You're doing everything right," she said. "Recovering is an active choice right now. Every day you stay in that bed is a day your body is doing something productive. It doesn't feel like agency, but it is." He looked at her. "Has anyone told you that you should have been a therapist? Every surgeon who trained me told me I was too empathetic for the OR," she said. "I proved them wrong." "Did you?" "I proved that empathy is a diagnostic tool," she said. "People tell you more when they feel understood, and the more they tell you, the better you treat them." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "What did they tell you? When you were training, what did people tell you?" She considered the question. "A man once told me, while I was closing his chest, that he'd never told his wife he loved her. Not once. They'd been married 30 years. She paused. "He told me because I'd asked him, before they put him under, if there was anything he wanted to make sure he remembered to do when he was better. He said that immediately, without thinking, What did you say? I told him he had time. Did he? He walked out of the hospital 8 days later, she said. I like to think he told her. Nico looked at her for a long time. What do you want to make sure you remember to do? He asked. She thought about her mother, about the address in Pescara, about the photograph albums with the gap where her father should have been. I know exactly what I want to do, she said. When you get home. Yes, he nodded, accepted this. Then, and if I told you that I'm not entirely certain I want you to get home? The air in the room changed. She looked at him very carefully. He looked back. He was not being careless. She knew him well enough now to understand that he said nothing carelessly, that every word he offered was chosen with the same precision he brought to everything else, the same economy and intentionality. You can't keep me here indefinitely, she said. I know. I have a life, a career, people who I know. He said again, not arguing, not negotiating, something quieter, something that was closer to an admission than a claim. Nico, she said. I'm aware of what I'm saying, he said. I'm not asking you to stay. I'm telling you that the prospect of you leaving. He paused, his jaw tightened slightly, the tells she had learnt to read as him editing something before it came out. I'm telling you it's not nothing, what this has been. She sat with this in the loaded, specific silence of a room where two people are both deciding how honest to be. No, she said finally, it's not nothing. That was all she said. It was enough. From somewhere in the house she heard Luca's voice, low and authoritative, and then quiet, and then nothing. And she stayed in the chair beside Nico Barone's bed, and neither of them spoke, and the storm outside moved on without landing. By the 16th day, Nico was walking the courtyard. Gianna had conceded this grudgingly and with conditions. The courtyard was enclosed, sheltered from wind, and close enough to the house's interior that she could see him through the kitchen window and be beside him in under 30 seconds if needed. He walked slowly, hands in the pockets of a dark coat Luca had brought from wherever Luca sourced things without being asked. His colour was better. His breathing was deep and steady, and only tightened slightly on the colder mornings. She watched him from the kitchen window with her coffee. Luca appeared beside her. He had a cup of his own, and the expression of a man who had slept 4 hours and was running on the specific fuel of someone who had too much to manage. The men who ordered it, he said. We've confirmed 2 names. She looked at him. His lieutenants? One of them was a lieutenant, Luca said. The other was unexpected. A financial officer. Someone who managed the legitimate business side of things. He had access to certain accounts, certain relationships with the Chicago people. He paused. His name is Caruso. Daniele Caruso. She absorbed this. What happens now? Nico decides what happens, Luca said, and the simplicity of this, the unelaborated certainty of it, told her more about the hierarchy here than anything else could have. And if Nico decides something terrible? Luca looked at her. Define terrible. She looked at him steadily. I think we both know what I mean. He was quiet for a moment. Then, whatever is decided will be handled operationally by the people whose role that is, not by you and not in front of you. He paused. I need you to trust that there are things here you don't need to be involved in. I'm a doctor, she said. I'm aware that my involvement ends at the medical. That's not— He stopped, looked into his coffee. That's not entirely what I meant. Then what did you mean? He looked out the window at Nico, who had stopped at the far end of the courtyard and was looking at the tree line with an expression she recognized from their late-night conversations, that interior, attending quality. I meant, Luca said, that whatever happens next, I want you safe. Not because you're necessary to his recovery, because— He stopped again. Luca, she said. Because you matter here, he said finally. That's the only way I know how to say it. She looked at him for a moment. This man who had organized her abduction and her captivity, and who had also, consistently and without drama, been the most honest person in the building. Who had told her about her father before Nico had, in the way he had, partial and careful and truthful. Who checked every morning, without being asked, whether she needed anything. I know, she said. Nico came back inside, stamping cold from his shoes, and looked from one of them to the other and said, What? With a directness that was so specifically him that she almost smiled. Nothing, she said. How was the cold? Clarifying, he said. I need to talk to Luca. I'll be in the East Wing, she said. She was already leaving when he said her name. She turned. He was looking at her. Don't be too far, he said. I'm never more than 30 seconds away, she said. Doctor's standing order. That's not what I meant, he said. She knew. She was reviewing her notes an hour later when Luca came to find her. He sat in the chair across the desk, the one he always used, and said, He wants to speak with you. Has something changed medically? No. A pause. He had me contact Pescara. She put down her pen. Your father. Luca paused, chose his words with visible care. Your father is alive and in good health. He's been informed that his situation is going to change, that the terms of the arrangement are being renegotiated. He looked at her. He asked about you. She was very still. He's known your name, Luca said, the work you do. He's followed your career. His voice was careful, careful. He told me he attended your graduation from Columbia Medical School. He stood outside, at a distance, and he watched you walk out. Her eyes stung. She pressed her lips together. He said— Luca stopped. He was not, she realized, a man who easily navigated other people's emotions. He was competent in so many areas that this incompetence was oddly touching. He said to tell you that the last thing he did before they moved him was to leave your mother enough money to put you through school, that he arranged it through a third party so it couldn't be traced back, that what came to you as a scholarship was not a scholarship. She sat with this, her full-ride scholarship to Columbia, which she had assumed was merit, had worked for, certainly, had earned academically without question, but which had come all those years ago from a man standing outside the gates, watching his daughter and not being able to come in. Take me to him, she said. Her voice was steady. She was surprised by how steady it was. After Nico is cleared to travel, Luca said, when this is handled. I promise you. She nodded, picked up her pen, set it down again. Luca, she said. Yes. Tell me honestly, she said. Does Nico want me here because I'm useful, or because— She stopped. Luca looked at her for a moment, then, very simply, "I've known Nico for 20 years," he said. "In those 20 years, I have watched him make decisions for reasons that were entirely strategic, and not once have I watched him lose sleep over whether someone was too far away." He paused. "Until now." On the 17th evening, she removed the chest drain. It was the appropriate time. The lung was fully expanded, the output had been negligible for days, and the risk of leaving it in had begun to exceed the risk of removing it. She explained this to Nico while she prepared, and he listened with the attentiveness he always gave her when she was in doctor mode, which was different from the attentiveness he gave her at other times. She had noticed this, the specific quality of it. When she was explaining something medical, he listened the way a man listens when he respects both the speaker and the information. When she was simply in the room, he watched the way a man watches, when neither the information nor the speaker is separable from the pleasure of the attending. She had been noticing this for days. She had been declining to name it. "Ready?" she said. "Yes." She worked quickly and cleanly. The moment of removal was uncomfortable. She could see it in the set of his jaw, the controlled stillness. And then it was done. And she sealed the sight and sat back and said, "Breathe." He breathed. She listened with the stethoscope, both sides, clear. "Good," she said. "Good," he repeated, and his voice was different, freer, she thought, more natural, as if the drain had been a tether to an earlier version of himself that he was now permitted to leave behind. He straightened, fully. Not the careful, managed straightening she'd watched him do for 2.5 weeks, but a real, unguarded expansion of his posture. And she saw what he looked like when he wasn't managing a damaged body. And it was, she made a careful note not to have a specific reaction to this. He looked at her. "Thank you," he said, again. "It's what I'm here for," she said, and heard, immediately, the ambiguity in it. So did he. Something moved in his face, careful and warm at once. "Is it?" She began to collect the materials, kept her hands busy. "Your mobility is going to improve significantly now," she said. "I want you to keep the effort level low for another week. Short walks, no stairs without someone present, no—" "Gianna," he said. She looked up. He was looking at her with that unguarded expression, the one that appeared sometimes, less rarely now than at the beginning, when the armour was simply not present. No calculation, no management, just him looking at her. "Sit down," he said. "Stop working for 5 minutes." She sat, left the materials on the tray, folded her hands in her lap. He leaned forward, carefully, she noted, the habitual care of a man who had spent 17 days learning where his limits were, and said, "What happens when this is over?" "I go home," she said. "You go to Italy." "And after Italy?" "I don't know what's after Italy for you," she said. "For me, it's the hospital." "That's not what I'm asking," he said. She looked at him. Outside the dark was complete. Winter dark, no moon, just the lights on the courtyard stones reflecting back up at the windows. "I know what you're asking," she said. "Then answer it." She was quiet for a moment, thought about her apartment in the West Village, about her colleagues, her residents, her particular hospital-shaped life that was small and focused and sufficient, about the fact that she had been taken from it without consent and had spent 17 days in a house with a man who was, she pressed lightly on the thought, feeling for its edges, extraordinary.
Not in the romantic novel sense, though the physical reality of him had become difficult to be neutral about. Extraordinary in the way that very few people were, fully present, fully honest within his chosen constraints, possessed of the particular magnetism that came not from performance, but from reality. He was genuinely himself, all the time, even in pain, even in weakness, and this was so rare that being near it had become addictive was the word that came to her, and she did not like it, but there it was. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I know what this is inside this house. I don't know what it is outside of it." "Then let's find out," he said. She looked at him for a long time. The distance between them was perhaps 3 feet. She was very aware of it. "You've been shot twice," she said. "Recently." "I'm aware. You have a recovery protocol that you need to follow." "I know." "And you have men who want to kill you." "Also aware." "Those are real obstacles," she said. "I need you to acknowledge that these are real obstacles." "They are," he said. "None of them are permanent." She looked down at her folded hands, back up at him. "What do you want?" she asked. "Specifically, not generally, specifically." He said without any hesitation, with the same directness he brought to everything, "I want you to stop thinking of yourself as someone who was brought here against her will and start thinking of yourself as someone who is choosing to be here. I want you to stop looking for exits, not because there aren't any, but because you don't actually want to use them. And I want." His voice dropped slightly, became quieter, became something she felt in her chest. "The chance to know you outside of this." A long silence. "That's very specific," she said. "I told you," he said. "I say what I mean." She stood. He watched her stand. She crossed the 3 feet of distance between them and stopped close. Close enough that she could see the exact line of the scar on his jaw, close enough to feel the warmth of him. And she reached out and touched it, the scar, just briefly, with 2 fingers, and he was absolutely still. The perfect stillness of someone holding themselves very carefully in place. "When you're cleared," she said, "for full activity." He looked at her. "How long?" "A week," she said, "maybe less." She stepped back. He let her. The stillness broke and he breathed, and she picked up her medical tray and went to the door and said, "Good night, Nico," without looking back. "Good night, Gianna," he said. She did not sleep. This was different from the previous nights of not sleeping. Those had been anxiety or processing or the unfamiliar bed. This was something else. This was the specific, alert wakefulness of someone who has made a decision and is not yet sure if it was the right one, and is too awake to be numb about it. She lay on her back and looked at the ceiling and thought about her life. She thought about the fact that she was 33 years old and had been, by every metric she'd applied, good at her life. Competent, careful, productive, specific in the ways that mattered, and appropriately unspecific in the ways that didn't. She had friendships she valued, and work she loved, and an apartment she had filled, slowly, with the things that meant something to her. She had not, she was willing to admit, in the honesty of the dark, been particularly good at intimacy. Not the physical kind. That was fine. That was manageable. The kind that required you to let someone actually in. The kind where you stopped performing capability and admitted to the person across from you that there were rooms inside you that you had not opened in a long time. She thought about the fact that a man she had met 17 days ago, under circumstances that were, by any objective standard, the worst possible introduction, had somehow gotten through. Not by force, Not by charm exactly, though he was, she would allow this, in the dark at 2 in the morning, undeniably that.
By being himself, with a consistency and a completeness that made other people's performances feel, in comparison, exhausting. She got up, put on the sweater she'd thrown over the chair, walked quietly down the hallway, the library, the chair by the window. She didn't turn on the lamp, just sat in the dark and the faint light that came through the window from the courtyard lights, and looked at the trees. She didn't hear him come in. She only knew he was there when he said, "You couldn't sleep either." She turned. He was in the doorway, dressed, looking at her with those dark eyes that she had stopped trying to read neutrally some days ago. "How long have you been standing there?" she asked. "Long enough to see that you weren't reading," he said. He crossed the room. He moved differently without the drain, more fluid, the guarded quality of his movement reduced. He sat not in the ottoman she usually took, but in the chair beside hers, and she adjusted to face him slightly. "I was thinking," she said, "about you, myself, both." She looked at the window. "The fact that none of this is a normal situation." "No," he agreed. "I don't know how much of what I feel is—" She paused. "Situational. The circumstance creates intimacy that isn't—" "Gianna," he said. She stopped. "I've been in many situations in my life," he said, "where proximity created the illusion of something. I know what that looks like from the inside. This is not that." She looked at him. He was looking at her steadily. "How do you know?" she said. "Because what I feel when you're in the room is not different from what I feel when you're not," he said. "When you're not in the room, the feeling is there, just pointed in the wrong direction, waiting." He paused. "That is not situational." She sat with this. The courtyard lights shifted, the timer on them changing phase, and the room went slightly darker, and she could see him less clearly, which was somehow easier, which made her think she was perhaps closer to what she was feeling than she'd been admitting. "I'm going to need time," she said, "when I leave, when things are normal, to know what this looks like in a normal context." "I have time," he said. "You're a mafia boss," she said, "with people trying to kill you." "I've been a mafia boss with people trying to kill me for 12 years, he said, with a dryness she was extremely fond of. "It does not appear to be incompatible with having a personal life." She almost laughed, caught it. But he heard the edge of it, and his mouth curved, and the room was very dark and very quiet. "Come here," he said, and it was not a command. It had none of the command quality. It was softer than that. It was the thing you said when you were offering rather than demanding, and you were not certain of the answer, and you were asking anyway. She moved from her chair to his, which was not large enough for 2 people, but was sufficient for 2 people who were willing to be close. And he put his arm around her shoulders with the careful deliberateness of a man who was aware of his limitations and who was also clearly aware of hers, and she let herself lean against his side and felt the warmth of him and the specific reality of him, alive, breathing, fixed, present, and closed her eyes. "This is against my medical advice," she said. "It's extremely gentle," he said. "I've been good for 17 days. "You have," she said. "You have been very good." He laughed, low and quiet and genuine, and she felt it more than heard it. They sat like that until the light in the east changed from black to deep blue, and neither of them slept, but neither of them needed to. On the 19th day, Nico stood at the window of the East Wing study and took a call. She did not hear the call. She was in the kitchen, which was 3 rooms away. What she heard was the quality of the silence afterward, the particular kind of silence that follows something definitive. And then Luca's voice, low and urgent, and then footsteps. She found them in the hallway. "What happened?" she said. Luca looked at Nico. Nico looked at her, and the expression on his face was the one she had not seen before, not the guarded professional version, not the warm version, but something in between, something that was the face of a man who had just been handed back his power and was deciding what to do with it. "Caruso," he said, "and the other one. They've been found." She understood what this meant in the specific, unelaborated way that she had come to understand the vocabulary of this world. Not found as in located and greeted, found as in the situation had resolved. "Is it?" She stopped. "Are you safe?" "Yes," Nico said. "The immediate threat is resolved." "And the Chicago connection?" "Has been communicated with," Luca said carefully, in terms that clarified the territorial arrangement. She stood in the hallway between these 2 men and felt the situation rearranging itself around her. The reason for the house, for the isolation, for the conversion of a dining room into a surgery, it was resolving. Not gone, not fully, because a man like Nico Barone would probably always have some version of this threat to live with. But this specific crisis, the one that had pulled her from her apartment and her life 3 weeks ago, it was closing. "When can you travel?" she said. Her voice was entirely clinical. She needed it to be. Nico looked at her. "When you tell me I can." "I need to assess you properly," she said. "Come." She took him through a full examination, thorough, careful, nothing rushed. His lung capacity was approximately 90% of normal. His wounds were healing cleanly, no infection, no signs of complication. His blood pressure was good. His pain level, when she pressed him honestly for the number, was a 2. "You can travel," she said, carefully. "No commercial flight. The pressure changes aren't ideal. Private, low altitude if possible." "Arranged," he said. She began noting things on her legal pad. "I'll write out the full protocol, medications, wound care schedule, follow-up imaging in 3 weeks. You'll need a thoracic specialist in Italy to do the follow-up, not a general Gianna," he said. She kept writing. "Gianna." She looked up. He was watching her, with the calm, specific attentiveness of a man who saw through things. "You're managing," he said. "Not in the good way. In the way where you find something to do so you don't have to feel what you're feeling." She put the pen down. "I'm fine," she said. "You're about to tell me you're fine," he said, "which is what you say when you're the opposite." She was quiet for a moment. "I don't know what I expected to feel when this ended," she said. "I thought I'd feel relieved, that I'd want to leave." She looked at the window. "I do want to leave. I want my life back. I want my mother. I want to go to Italy and find my father." She paused. "I also want—" She stopped. "Say it," he said. "I also want to see how this continues," she said, "which is insane, given how it started, given what you are and what my life is, given that 3 weeks ago I was minding my own business and you had me—" "I know," he said quietly. "I know all of that. And I'm not asking you to rationalize it. I'm asking you to decide whether you want to know what comes next. She looked at him. Do you? He said. She breathed, in and out. The particular long breath of a woman who has spent 3 weeks being afraid and practical and clinical, and who was, she was realizing, deeply and irrevocably tired of pretending that the man in front of her was a patient and nothing else. Yes, she said. He nodded. No triumph, just a receiving of the answer, quiet and real. He reached across the small distance between them and took her hand and held it the way you hold something you intend to keep, loosely, confidently, without drama. Then we continue, he said, in the outside world, on terms that make sense in the outside world. You're going to be in Italy, she said, for a while. He looked at her. Italy is not the moon. It's where you were going anyway. His thumb moved against her hand. Your father is there. She let out a breath. You already thought of this? I think about most things before I say them, he said. I noticed, she said, and he looked at her, and there was warmth in it, real warmth, the specific warmth of being known. She did not let go of his hand. Not yet. She left before he did. This was appropriate and right. He needed one more day of monitoring before the travel preparation could begin, and she was, formally, no longer needed in the medical capacity, and the fiction of her captivity, which had become gradually more fictional over 3 weeks, reached its logical conclusion. Luca drove her, not back to the brownstone, to her hospital first, because she had asked, because she needed to see it, the familiar shape of it in the November morning, the ambulances at the bay, the nurses she'd worked with for 6 years, coming in for early shifts with coffee cups, and the particular posture of people who had chosen hard work and meant it. She sat in the front of the car and looked at it. Do you need a few minutes? Luca said. No, she said. I just needed to see it. He waited. I want to ask you something, she said. Ask. Who was she? The person Nico said I reminded him of. Luca was quiet for a long moment. His mother, he said. She was a doctor, did not survive long enough to know what he became. He paused. She was direct the way you are. She did not minimize herself to make rooms more comfortable. She sat with this. That's not a comfortable thing to be compared to, she said. No, Luca agreed, but it's an honest one. She thought about a man who had grown up without his mother and who had inherited his uncle's empire and who lay in a bed for 2 weeks and watched her work, and something in her specific way of moving through the world had reached him through whatever distance he maintained from most people. He's going to be all right, she said. Not medically. Both of them understood she did not mean medically. He was all right before you arrived, Luca said. He'll be better now. She looked at him, this man who had organized her kidnapping and who she had, without quite deciding to, come to trust. You knew, she said, when you came for me, what this would become. He considered this. I thought it was possible, he said. Nico does not open up easily, but when he does, it is complete. I have seen it twice in 20 years. He looked at the road. I thought it was possible, he said again. And you brought me here anyway, she said. He was dying, Luca said simply. She couldn't argue with that. He drove her home. Her apartment, when she opened the door, was exactly as she had left it. Keys on the hook, jacket she'd taken off and not put away over the back of the chair, the half-finished Barolo on the counter. 3 weeks, and it was unchanged. 3 weeks, and she was not. She sat on her couch in her coat for a few minutes and looked at her apartment and let it be real around her. Then she got up, opened the Barolo and poured a glass, and stood at her kitchen counter and drank it slowly. And it was, as it had always been, very good. Her phone was on the table, returned as promised, undisturbed. She picked it up, looked at it, looked at the number she had for her mother, who was in Astoria, in the apartment she had moved into when Gianna was in medical school, who would be awake by now, because she was always awake by now, who did not know what the last 3 weeks had held, or what Gianna was about to tell her. She dialed. Her mother answered on the second ring. "Gianna, how are you?" "I'm well," she said. "I'm home. I have something to tell you." She paused. "Can you sit down?" A long pause on the line. The particular quality of her mother's silences. Careful, careful. And then, "Yes," she said. "I'm sitting." Gianna closed her eyes and took a breath and said, "He's alive, Mama. Papa is alive." The silence on the other end of the line was the longest she had ever heard her mother hold. And then something happened. A sound, small and raw and 33 years in the making. And Gianna pressed her hand over her eyes and cried without caring about it. And her mother cried. And outside the window of the West Village apartment, the city moved past, indifferent and enormous and ordinary. Italy in December was cold along the coast, the Adriatic sharp-aired and grey-green, the hills behind the city brown with the end of autumn. She flew into Rome and took a train north along the coast. Luca had arranged everything, the address in Pescara, the quiet conversation that had been conducted between Nico's representatives and the men who had maintained the monitoring arrangement for 23 years, the careful withdrawal of whatever threat had kept Matteo Romano in his fictive death. The arrangement, as Nico had described it, had been dissolved. The organization that had maintained it no longer existed in the same form. The man it had been built to contain was, now, simply a man. She found the address in the early afternoon, a small apartment building on a quiet street near the port. The city was not what she'd imagined. She had not, she realized, imagined it particularly. Because imagining implied a belief that the moment would come, and she had not fully let herself believe that. She had kept it theoretical, a plan rather than a place, and now here was the actual door and the actual stone steps and the actual name on the buzzer. Romano M., which meant he had kept the name, or taken it back. She stood on the step for what was probably 2 full minutes. Pedestrians moved past her. A cat watched her from the wall to her left, with the bored patience of cats everywhere. She pressed the buzzer. The intercom crackled. Then a voice, older than she remembered, roughened, but still, unmistakably, the voice that had sung Neapolitan songs in the kitchen when he thought no one was listening. "Chi è? Who is it?" She pressed her hand against the cold metal of the buzzer plate. "Sono Gianna," she said. "It's Gianna." The silence on the intercom was very long, and then the door buzzed open. He was thinner than she remembered. 23 years will thin a person, particularly 23 years of a certain kind of silence. He stood in his apartment doorway and looked at her with eyes that were unmistakably her eyes, the same shape, the same shade of grey-brown that she had spent her whole life looking out of. And his face did the thing that faces do when they are receiving something they have wanted for too long to prepare for. She had told herself she would be composed. She had managed her mother's call with some grace, had gotten through the initial shock and the weeping and the hours of conversation that followed, had organized herself for this meeting with the same professional discipline she brought to everything. None of it held when she saw him. Giannina, he said. The diminutive, the childhood name, the name she had not heard in 23 years. And something in her simply gave way, and she stepped forward, and the arms that came around her were older and thinner, but held her with the same specific completeness that she had forgotten she remembered. They stayed like that for a long time. He made coffee. They talked for 4 hours. He told her everything, not asking for forgiveness, which she appreciated because forgiveness was a process and not a moment, but simply telling her, laying the facts out with the honesty of a man who had carried the weight of them for 2 decades and found it, at last, briefly lighter to set down. He told her about the FBI contact, about the moment he understood it had been discovered, about the men who came and the choice that was presented, death or exile. And he had chosen exile because she was 3 years old then, and her mother had been pregnant, though that pregnancy had not survived the shock of those weeks, a sibling she had never known about. She absorbed this too, added it to the inventory of things she was processing. "Your mother," he said. "How is she?" "She knows you're alive," Gianna said. "I told her." His face did something that she could not bear to look at directly. "How did she—" "She cried," Gianna said, "for a long time. And then she said she always knew." She paused. "She said she always knew." He pressed his hand over his mouth, nodded. "She wants to talk to you," Gianna said. "When you're ready, when it's safe, when we've—" She stopped. "When we've figured out what comes next." "What comes next?" he said, as if the phrase itself were new to him, after 23 years of only "what comes next" not being a real thing. "Yes," she said, "that's the question now." She told him, briefly, how she had come to be in Italy. She left out most of the details. She would not lie to him, but she also did not owe him the specifics. Not yet, not in this first conversation. She said she had been treating a patient who had access to the information about his location, and that the patient had resolved the situation that had kept him here. "Who is he?" her father asked. She thought about how to answer this. "Someone who is trying to make something right," she said. Her father looked at her for a moment. He was perceptive. She came by it honestly, she was realizing. "He matters to you," he said. She looked at the coffee cup in her hands. "Yes," she said, "he does." Her father nodded slowly, did not push, simply said, "Bring him to meet me when it's time." She had 3 days between Pescara and her flight home. On the second day, Nico arrived in Rome. He had been at a property in Umbria, his family's, the legitimate one, a restored farmhouse in the hills above Spoleto, where, he had told her in the car from the villa, he went to remember what quiet felt like. He had been there for a week, officially recovering, realistically waiting. And when she sent the message that she was in Italy, he was in Rome in 4 hours. She was at the hotel bar when he walked in. She had dressed carefully and then mocked herself for dressing carefully and then dressed carefully again, because some things are what they are. She was in black, a dress that was not precisely doctor and not precisely anything else, just herself, which was what she had been in this building for a month and which she had decided to stop apologizing for. She was on her second glass of wine and reading the menu card because something to hold had seemed advisable. He walked across the bar floor with the ease of someone who had been in a lot of rooms and never needed to adjust to them. And he sat across from her, and he looked at her in a way that contained the entire 3 weeks of the villa distilled down to a single, unambiguous look. "You look well," he said. "You look better than you have any right to," she said. His mouth curved. He ordered something. She didn't catch what. She was too occupied with the specific experience of seeing him in a real room, a room with no medical trays and no guards in the hallway and no crisis to manage, just a hotel bar in Rome and a man in a dark suit looking at her across a small table. "How was Pescara?" he said. She told him, not all of it. Some of it was too tender to expose to lamplight yet, too recently excavated, but enough. He listened in the way he listened, fully, without preparing his response while she was still talking, and when she was finished he said, "Good, I'm glad it was good," and she believed him, and that was enough. "My father wants to meet you," she said. He looked at her. "When?" "When things are settled, when you're back in Italy for a longer period." She paused. "He said to bring you when it's time." "He sounds like you," Nico said. "He's where I got it from," she said. They had dinner, a small place near the Pantheon that he had a reservation for, which told her he had arranged the evening with some care, and she found it moving, the effort of it. This man who moved through the world with such authority and such self-sufficiency, who had told her that he said what he meant and meant what he said, who had arranged a reservation at a small restaurant near the Pantheon because he had wanted to take her somewhere good. They talked for 3 hours, not about the villa, not directly, not entirely, though it was present between them the way any significant shared experience is, the subtext of everything. They talked about the city, which he knew as only people who have lived in a place rather than visited it can know, the specific history, the personal geography, the particular way he talked about Rome that made her understand he had spent time here that mattered to him. They talked about medicine. He asked her questions, real questions, not polite interest, the detailed and specific questions of someone who had been watching a person work for 3 weeks and was actually curious about the mechanism of it. She told him about surgery in a way she rarely told anyone, because most people were not curious about the actual practice of it. They wanted the heroic version or the dramatic version, and he wanted the real version. He listened to the real version like a man who preferred it. Walking back to the hotel afterward, in the December cold, Rome lit and immense around them, he took her hand. Not in the library at midnight way, which had been careful and tentative and full of all the things they weren't saying yet. Here, on the street, in the open, his hand simply found hers and held it. And she held back. And they walked that way, along the cobblestones under the Roman lights. Near the hotel she stopped. He stopped. She looked up at him, all of him, this real and complicated and extraordinary man who had entered her life through the worst possible door, and who she was allowing herself to know this, in significant danger of loving. "You should know," she said, "that I'm going to need things to be slow." "I know," he said. I'm going to need you to understand that I have a life that I built and that I value, and that I am not prepared to dismantle." "I know that too," he said. "I'm not asking for dismantling. I'm also going to need—" She stopped. "I'm also going to need you to be honest with me. About everything. Always. Not the selective honesty of keeping things from me to protect me. Everything." He looked at her. His expression was serious, not solemnly so, but honestly so. The face of a man receiving a condition and weighing it with real consideration. "Some things I cannot," he started. "I know what you cannot," she said. "I'm not asking you to be someone else. I'm asking you to be honest about what is and isn't possible. So I know what I'm choosing." He was quiet for a moment. The city moved around them. "I can do that," he said. "Yes," she nodded. He looked down at her, and she looked up at him. And it was Rome and December, and her whole life had just rearranged itself into something she was going to have to figure out how to inhabit. And she lifted herself onto her toes and kissed him. His hand came up to the side of her face, careful, careful, the same care he brought to everything, and he kissed her back, there in the lamplight on the Roman street, and it was not like the movies. It was better than the movies. It was specific and real, and contained everything that had been building for 3 weeks and was now, finally, permitted. When she stepped back, his hand stayed against her jaw. "Gianna," he said. "I know," she said. They stood there for another moment, the city alive around them, indifferent and beautiful. And she thought about her father in Pescara, and her mother in Astoria, and her hospital in New York, and the man in front of her, who was all of these things together, the door through which she had found all of them, and she thought, yes. This is what comes next. Spring came, as it always did, without asking permission. 6 months later, Gianna Romano stood in an operating theatre at Manhattan Presbyterian and closed the chest of a 40-year-old man who had suffered a traumatic cardiac contusion in a construction accident. And her hands were as steady as they had ever been, and the resident across from her was watching with the focused intensity she had once watched her own teachers with. And when she said, "Close," her voice carried the particular clarity that the room had learned to recognize as the end of crisis and the beginning of repair. She changed in the locker room, checked her phone. 2 messages. The first was from her mother, who was in Pescara. This had happened twice in the past 3 months. Elena Romano taking the train from Rome, where she was visiting her sister, further north along the coast to the small apartment near the port where her husband of 35 years had been not dead for 2 decades. The visits were not, as far as Gianna could tell, simple. They were complicated and sometimes painful, and required a great deal of patience from everyone involved. But they were happening. That was the fact, and the fact was extraordinary. The message from her mother said, "He made the pasta you liked, the one from Naples. I didn't tell him you liked it, he just made it." "What does that mean?" Gianna typed back, "It means he's paying attention. It runs in the family." She was pulling on her coat when the second message arrived. Nico. Not a message, in fact, a photograph. The view from the farmhouse in Umbria, taken from what she recognized as the eastern window that caught the morning light in a way that was, she had been there twice now, genuinely extraordinary. The hills in the photograph were green, early spring green, the kind of green that Italy produced in April and exported to the rest of the world as an aspiration. Below the photograph, a single line, "Missing you," in Italian. She sat on the locker room bench and looked at the photograph for longer than was probably practical, and felt the particular warmth of a person being thought of from a great distance by someone who meant it. She typed back, "I'll be there in 3 weeks." The response came in 30 seconds. Not 3 weeks. 2. She smiled. Typed, "You're not my patient anymore. You don't get to give me scheduling instructions." Another 30 seconds. Non-medical request. She thought about it for approximately 4 seconds. "Fine. 2 weeks," she typed. She found Luca outside the hospital. He was leaning against a car that was absolutely not a hospital parking car, dark and unmarked and impeccably maintained, and he straightened when she came through the doors and looked at her with the steady, slightly complicated expression she had come to understand was his neutral face for her specifically. Complicated because she occupied a role in the world he managed that was unlike the role anyone else occupied. "What are you doing here?" she said. "In the neighborhood," he said, and they both knew this was not true, and neither of them addressed it. She had developed the habit since returning to New York of having lunch with Luca approximately once a month. This had begun as a continuation of the operational relationship. He was the point of contact for the situation with her father's safety, the person who had managed the gradual dissolution of the monitoring arrangement and the slow, careful bureaucratic work of constructing a situation where Matteo Romano could, if he chose, exist again in the world. But it had become something else, or something more, because Luca Ferrante was, she had decided, a friend. An unlikely one, under extraordinary circumstances, but real. "How is he?" she said. "Good," Luca said. "Better. He had Marco run him through a full assessment last week, and the results were—" He paused. "Marco said it was the fastest full recovery he'd seen after this kind of injury." "Good stock," she said. Luca looked at her. Something moved in his face, the specific warmth of someone watching a thing go right, a person who had wanted something for 20 years and was watching it become possible. "He's coming to New York next month," he said. "Officially. Business interests." "I know," she said. "He wants to—" Luca stopped. "He asked me, specifically, to not plan anything. He wants to figure out the city version of things himself." She thought about this, about what the city version would look like, her apartment, her hospital, the streets she knew, and him in them. She thought about the navigation of it, the practicality of 2 people from different worlds finding a shared geography. She knew it would not be simple. She also knew that nothing worth having was. "Tell him," she said, "that I'll meet him at the restaurant in the West Village, the Italian one on Charles Street, 7 o'clock. Luca looked at her. "You've already picked the restaurant." "I'm a planner," she said. He smiled, a real one, which was rare enough on his face to be notable. "I'll tell him." She started toward the street, then turned back. "Luca." He looked at her. "Thank you," she said, "for choosing me. 3 weeks ago this would not have been my preferred origin story, but—" She paused, let herself feel the full weight of it, the ledger in the library, her father's voice on the intercom, her mother's sound on the phone. Rome. The courtyard in November. A man in a dark coat walking very carefully and very stubbornly toward his own survival. Thank you. He held her gaze for a moment, then he nodded once, with the economy of a man who does not waste motion on things that are understood. Go to work, Dr. Romano, he said. She went. The restaurant on Charles Street had small tables and low lighting and a wine list that she had researched in the weeks before, with more attention than she was strictly prepared to admit. She arrived 8 minutes early and sat at the table she had reserved, corner, sightlines to the door, back to the wall, which she had chosen unconsciously and only noticed while she was already seated. She had learned, it appeared, to think about a room the way he did. He was on time. She saw him come through the door, dark coat, unhurried, the particular ease of him in a room, and he found her immediately, the way he always did, as if some specific frequency existed between them that made location unnecessary. He crossed the room, sat down across from her, looked at her with the same look she had last seen in Rome, the one that contained everything, the whole accumulated weight of what they had been through and become, simply directed at her with the calm confidence of a man who had decided and was not in the habit of second-guessing his decisions. 2 weeks, he said. I made it. You did, she said. How are you feeling? He gave her the look. Old habit, she said. You'll ask me that for the rest of your life, he said. Probably, she agreed. How are you feeling? His mouth curved. Good, he said. Very good. He looked at her. You look... He paused, let himself look at her in the unhurried way he had, which was not possessive and not objectifying, and was instead the way you look at something you are glad to have in front of you. You look like New York. Is that a compliment? Everything I say to you is a compliment, he said. You just don't always recognize them. She almost laughed. He saw it, and his eyes warmed. The waiter came, they ordered. The restaurant moved around them, the ordinary, beautiful noise of people eating and talking and existing in the city. And she thought about how much the world had changed in 6 months, and how it had changed not in the dramatic, irreversible way of loss, but in the quieter and more permanent way of gain. The things added, not the things taken. Her father, in Pescara, making Neapolitan pasta for a wife he had thought he would never see again. Her mother, learning to re-inhabit a marriage she had mourned for 2 decades, a city she knew, and a hospital she loved, and a career she had built with both hands. And across a small table in a restaurant on Charles Street, a man who had asked her once if she wanted to know what came next, and who had waited through surgery and recovery and October and November and December and the first green push of spring, with a patience that had nothing to do with passivity and everything to do with certainty. She picked up her wine glass. So, she said. So, he said. What comes next? He looked at her, held her gaze with that complete, unguarded attention. The mahogany dark of his eyes, the scar on his jaw, the ease of him, the weight of him, the specific and particular reality of him. This, he said, all of this. She held up her glass. He raised his. To this, then, she said. To this, he said. They drank, and outside the window the West Village moved past in the spring evening, alive and indifferent and full of the million ordinary stories that are, all of them, the only stories there are. people finding each other in the middle of the impossible and deciding, against all rational evidence, to stay. She stayed, he stayed, and the city held them, as it holds everyone, imperfectly and completely, and the night deepened around them, and it was enough. It was more than enough.